She screamed that I was trespassing while standing on land I legally owned, so I locked the gate, waved, and walked away. Her BMW still stuck behind my new fence. She didn't know yet, but I also owned the house she was screaming from. Think you know how it got to this point? Take a wild guess in the comments. I bet you won't even come close. Alright, here we go. Buckle up. Let me back up a bit. I didn't always think I'd end up owning someone's house just to get him to stop harassing me, but life's funny like that. When we bought the property, I wasn't looking for trouble, just peace. That's all I ever wanted. Me, my wife Laura, our daughter Maddie, and about 15 acres of woods, pasture, and the most peaceful little lake you've ever seen. Not big enough to be on any map, not connected to any public road, but deep and cold and quiet. We called it Lone Duck Lake, 'cause first time we walked the land, there was just one old drake floating out there like he owned the place. Felt right. I'd just gotten out of the Air Force a couple years earlier, worked avionics on F-16s mostly. Long hours, always some checklist to run down, some colonel breathing down your neck. Good work, but I was cooked. After 20 years of doing everything by someone else's book, I wanted to write my own. So when I found this patch of land way out near the edge of the county, no HOA, no neighbors for a mile, no screaming jets overhead, I didn't hesitate. Took every cent we had, plus a modest VA loan, but we made it happen. At first, it was just the house and that lake, overgrown pastures, a busted-down barn leaning like it had 1 foot in the grave. I spent that whole first year just fixing things, tearing down the rotten fencing, clearing out old barbed wire that had been swallowed by the grass, rehanging gates that wouldn't shut right since the Reagan administration. Laura took to it fast. She'd been a teacher back in Oklahoma, but once we moved, she shifted to working online, tutoring, doing some writing. She even started a little blog about off-grid living, chickens, home canning, all that. Not like influencer stuff, just real talk. Meanwhile, our daughter Maddie, she was 10 then, spent her weekends half covered in dirt, feeding goats and trying to convince us to get her a pony, which we did. Eventually. I don't know if it was pride or just the peace of it, but the longer we stayed, the more it started to feel like we were finally building something that was ours. Not just a house or a few animals, a life. I built a dock on the lake with my own 2 hands, hauled every plank down there in my beat-up Silverado, spent weeks sanding and sealing and bolting things into place. I remember standing on the edge one evening with a cold beer, watching the sun drop into the trees across the water. That's when it really sank in. This is mine, all of it. The lake, the pasture, the forest behind it, the dirt under my boots. I made a promise to myself that night. No one was ever going to take this from me. Thing is, I didn't realize back then that not everyone respects fences and boundaries the same way. Some people see quiet land like that and think it's wasted. Unclaimed. Up for the taking if they're just bold enough, or connected enough, or pushy enough. I didn't know it yet, but just a few miles down the road was a neighborhood called Maple Ridge, cookie-cutter houses with plastic siding, American flags, and trimmed hedges that all looked like they came out of the same mold. It was clean, polished, a little too polished if you ask me, and that's where she lived. But I hadn't met her yet. Not then. Back then, things were good. Back then, I still thought, being left alone was a right. It started with a letter. No return address, just a plain white envelope tucked under the bungee cord on our gate like some half-assed attempt at espionage. I figured maybe it was a local kid being cute, or someone wanting to buy eggs or hay, but when I opened it, it wasn't a note, or a thank you card, or anything like that. It was a notice of architectural violation. I'll never forget those words. Sounded official, over-official, like someone really wanted to sound like they had power. The paper had a cheap HOA logo printed in the corner, not embossed, not even color, and below it, in bold letters, unapproved outbuilding construction, immediate attention required. I read it twice, trying to figure out what the hell they were talking about. Only construction we had going was me putting a roof over my tractor, 4 posts, tin sheets, and a whole lot of cursing. Nothing you'd call glamorous, and certainly nobody's business but mine. At the bottom, there was a threat of fines and a compliance deadline. No contact name, no phone number. Just Maple Ridge HOA Compliance Committee. And that's when I laughed out loud. See, Maple Ridge wasn't just a few feet away. It was a whole different subdivision, entirely separated by a tree line and my fence. There was no overlap. I'd done my homework when we bought this land, pored over the plat maps, checked for servitudes, easements, overlapping jurisdictions. Hell, I even called the county clerk to double check. Our parcel was privately owned, zoned agricultural, and not under any HOA's umbrella. But the thing that got me wasn't the letter itself. It was the fact that someone physically came onto my land to deliver it. Past the fence, past the private property sign. That was what rubbed me raw. I tossed the letter in the drawer next to the coffee filters and forgot about it for a few days. Honestly, I thought it was just some busybody throwing their weight around, trying to sound important. Laura thought maybe it was a mix-up, a neighbor's letter blown over by the wind or delivered wrong. But I had this nagging feeling. You know that sense when something isn't sitting right, but you can't put your finger on why. Like a rattle under the hood you try to ignore, 'cause the car still runs fine. But deep down, you know it's not going to go away on its own. That weekend I was out by the road fixing a busted hinge on the gate, and that's when I saw her. Black SUV rolls up. Tinted windows, silver trim, looked like it hadn't seen a dirt road in its life. She rolls down the window, and even before she speaks, I clock the energy. Stiff smile, way too much perfume, hair sprayed into a helmet. The kind of person who carries a clipboard even when they don't need one. She looked over the gate like it offended her. Then she gave me this practiced smile and said, "Hi, I'm Karen Delaney. I'm with the Maple Ridge HOA. Just wanted to let you know we sent you a notice last week. Construction's not permitted without pre-approval from the committee." I just blinked. "You mean the tarp I stapled to some 2x4s to keep my tractor dry?" She laughed like I'd told a joke. "Yes, that. You can't just start building structures. It sets a precedent, and the community has a certain standard." I leaned on the gate, looked her straight in the eye. "Ma'am, this is private land. Your HOA doesn't reach out here. You've got no jurisdiction, no legal say over what I build or don't build." She smiled tighter. "Well, sometimes these boundaries can be confusing. We have overlapping concerns in the area, just trying to avoid long-term issues. You wouldn't want things to get complicated." That last line stuck in my ear like a tick. Complicated? Now, I've dealt with enough bureaucrats in the military to know when someone's bluffing. But there was something else behind her tone, not just arrogance, but certainty, like she was sure she was in the right, even when she wasn't. That's more dangerous than outright lying, if you ask me. I didn't take the bait. I just nodded and said, "I'll build what I damn well please on my own land. You folks stay on your side of the fence and we won't have any problems." She drove off without another word, but not before giving my place the kind of slow, judgmental once-over usually reserved for TSA pat-downs. Like she was mentally noting everything she didn't approve of. The gravel drive, the goats, the rain barrel tied up with bungee cords. That should have been the end of it. I mean, how do you argue with a property line? It's a line, a legal one. You can look it up, touch it, fence it. But looking back now, that moment, her sitting in that SUV, acting like she was doing me a favor by warning me, that was the first crack, the first tiny fracture in the peace I'd built. And if I'd known then how deep she was willing to dig her claws in, I might have taken that letter a whole lot more seriously. I wish I could say that was the last I saw of her, that I stood my ground, made it clear, and she moved on to annoy someone else about their mailbox color or garden gnome situation. But nah, that little warning shot, that was just her warming up. It started small. First thing I noticed was a couple of SUVs parked along the fence line by the lake, not on my side, but right up against the barbed wire. I figured maybe some of the Maple Ridge folks were curious about the property. I didn't think much of it until Laura came back from a walk and said she saw a woman, Karen, no surprise there, taking pictures of our dock. Not from the road, from the woods, on our side of the fence. Now, my dock's not some fancy yacht club setup. It's hand-built, old school, solid. I laid every plank myself, treated the posts, tied the rope cleats on with a beer in one hand, and a YouTube tutorial paused on my phone. That dock is part of me, so seeing someone sneaking around, snapping pictures of it like they were gathering evidence or casing the place, that got under my skin. I added a chain and a private property no trespassing sign, even though we already had a bunch. I mean, how many damn signs does it take for people to understand a fence isn't a suggestion? Next came the complaints. First one was noise. According to the letter, someone from Maple Ridge had reported loud construction and engine noise disturbing the peace. Which, again, I'm on an isolated piece of land, and the closest Maple Ridge house is a good 100 yards from my fence. The only thing making noise was my tractor, and it wasn't exactly a rock concert. Then it was unlicensed lodging. That one made me laugh out loud. We've got 2 little cabins on the lake. Nothing fancy, mostly just for friends or family who visit, sometimes rented short-term through a local group. Nothing sketchy, everything legal. I'd filled out all the paperwork with the county when we set it up, but somehow, someone filed a complaint with the zoning board claiming I was running a commercial resort. That triggered a whole inspection, which wasted half my week. The inspector actually apologized. He'd been out here before, back when we filed for our agritourism permit. Said everything looked great, but he had to follow up on the complaint. Anonymous, of course, I knew damn well who it was. A few weeks later, I came home from the feed store and saw the gate to the pasture half ripped off the hinge. One of the goats was missing. That one hit hard, not just financially, but emotionally. Maddie cried for a week. We found the poor thing later, dead in the ditch about half a mile down the road. She'd gotten hit, most likely right after wandering out. I spent that whole weekend reinforcing the gate with steel brackets and a backup latch. Didn't prove anything, couldn't point a finger, but it wasn't a raccoon that undid the chain and slid the bolt off. Somebody wanted to send a message. Then came the fake inspector. This guy shows up in a reflective vest, clipboard in hand, talking about community standards enforcement. Claims he's from the county, but doesn't show ID. He starts walking around the property like he owns it, peeking into sheds, poking at the compost bin, tapping his pen against the propane tank like he's making notes. I step out of the barn and ask him who he's with. He stutters, says something about external compliance review. I ask for ID again. This time he just says, "I'll be back," and bolts for his truck. I called the county the next morning. No one by that name, no inspection scheduled. No such position even existed. I installed cameras after that. Laura wasn't sleeping well anymore, and honestly, neither was I. That's when I realized this wasn't just about the property. This wasn't Karen playing little HOA games to pass the time. This was something else. A campaign. A slow, methodical push to make us uncomfortable, exhausted, angry, maybe even desperate. You ever hear that saying, "Death by 1,000 cuts"? That's exactly what it felt like. Nothing huge, nothing outright illegal, just this constant stream of annoyances, threats, and little violations that never quite crossed the line, just close enough to keep us looking over our shoulders. And I kept telling myself, don't take the bait, stay calm, be smart, document everything, act like you're being watched, because you probably are. But the part that really started eating at me? She never stopped smiling. Karen would drive by real slow, windows down, that smug little grin like she'd just aced a test you didn't know you were taking. Sometimes she'd wave, other times she'd just stare like she was waiting for something, watching for a crack to open. I told Laura, this isn't normal. She's pushing, testing limits. Sooner or later, she's going to try something bigger. Laura nodded, but I could see the worry in her eyes, and I knew she was wondering the same thing I was. How far is this woman willing to go? Thing was, we were nowhere near the worst of it yet. At first, I told myself I wasn't going to stoop to her level. I didn't want to turn it into some petty war of fences and threats. I just wanted to live my damn life, so I did what any reasonable person would do. I tried to handle it by the book. No shouting matches, no crazy emails, just calm, measured steps. I figured if I kept my head on straight and did everything the right way, eventually the truth would win out. Eventually, someone would step in and tell her to knock it off. So I started documenting. Every complaint, every weird encounter, every mystery truck parked by the fence. I had a binder thick enough to choke a horse. Screenshots, photos, security footage, even saved a voicemail or two where Karen tried to sound concerned about our animals being unsafe. I went down to the sheriff's office to file a formal report. I knew Sheriff Din from back when I first moved out here. We'd talked a couple times at local town hall things, mostly about coyotes and trespassers. He was one of those old school guys, no nonsense, but fair. His deputy took my statement, and I handed over a USB drive with clips of Karen snooping around, the fake inspector, even the day I caught someone slipping another one of those bogus letters under our gate. A week later, I got a call back from Din himself. He said, "Look, Jack, I believe you, I do, but none of this rises to the level of criminal trespass. You don't have her on video inside the property. She's not making direct threats. She's tiptoeing the line." I asked him what I was supposed to do. Just let her keep pushing until something bad happened? He sighed, said his hands were tied unless I caught her red-handed doing something more serious. That's the kind of answer that stays with you. More serious. Like losing a goat, getting stalked, having your property sabotaged. None of that counts until something really breaks. I didn't blame him. I knew how the system worked, but it didn't make it feel any less like a dead end. So next, I called a lawyer. He was local, knew the area, and he didn't laugh when I said the words harassment by HOA. He'd apparently had a few cases like this before. Not exactly the same, but enough to know that these people, the Karen types, they're like weeds. You can't just clip the top. You gotta dig deep. He reviewed the property records, the zoning documents, confirmed what I already knew, that my land was completely outside the Maple Ridge HOA boundaries. Legally, they had no more authority over me than a Girl Scout troop. He drafted a cease and desist letter, real formal and shiny looking, citing half a dozen property codes and trespass statutes. We sent it certified mail to Karen's address, to the HOA's P.O. box, even to the property management company they worked with. And for a few weeks, nothing. No complaints, no SUVs, no fake inspectors. I let myself believe, stupidly, that maybe it worked. Then I got a visit from the county zoning board. Again. This time it was about non-permitted agricultural expansion. According to the complaint, I was illegally diverting water from the lake, which is hilarious because I wasn't diverting a damn thing. The only pipe going in was for the small pump I used to water the pasture during dry spells, and that had been approved years ago. The inspector was polite but firm, said they had to investigate every formal complaint. And since it came in signed by Maple Ridge HOA, it triggered a full inspection. That's when I realized something I hadn't fully accepted before. They weren't just trying to scare me. They were playing the long game, wearing me down, making life harder in little ways, hoping I'd eventually screw up or just throw in the towel and sell. Laura saw it too. She didn't say it, but I could feel it in the way she avoided walking the property alone, the way she double-checked the locks before bed, the way she looked at Maddie like she was constantly doing threat assessments in her head. Maddie asked one night, out of nowhere, "Are we gonna have to move?" That one hit me like a punch to the chest. I'd done everything I could to keep this fight away from her, away from both of them, but it was seeping in like water under a door. No matter how many towels you lay down, it still finds a way. I told her no. I said this is our home, and nobody's gonna take that from us. But the truth was, I didn't know anymore. I'd tried every official route I could think of. Law enforcement, legal pressure, county regulators, and every single one either hit a wall or circled back to me having to prove I'd done nothing wrong. That's the worst part. You spend all your time just trying to prove you're not the bad guy, that you're not the crazy one, that you're not overreacting. Meanwhile, she gets to keep poking and pushing, never leaving fingerprints. One afternoon, I called a friend of mine from my Air Force days, guy named Marcus who'd gone into real estate law. I wasn't looking for legal help, just someone to talk to who knew what this crap looked like from the inside. He listened to the whole story and said, "She's baiting you. She wants you to snap, make a mistake, get aggressive, do something she can use against you." I asked, "So what am I supposed to do? Just sit here and take it?" He said, "No, you outlast her. You dig in, you stay smart, because the second you swing first, she wins." So that's what I did, or tried to anyway, but I won't lie. There were nights I stood out by the lake, looking at my land, wondering if I'd made a mistake buying it. If maybe I should have just picked some place further out, deeper in the sticks, with no neighbors for miles. Because at that point, it didn't feel like I owned my land anymore. It felt like I was just defending it, one complaint at a time. And deep down, I was starting to wonder how much more I could take. I was this close to giving up. Not giving up in the dramatic pack it all in and move to Montana kind of way, but the kind where you just stop fighting. Stop calling county offices. Stop documenting every tire track and weird flyer shoved in your mailbox. Stop caring whether the goat's fencing got snipped again. I was tired. Not the kind of tired you sleep off, but the kind that starts to rot you from the inside. Then, out of nowhere, I get a call from an old friend. Guy named Mitch, owns a landscaping company out of town. We hadn't talked in a while, but he'd done some brush clearing for me the year we bought the place. Good guy, solid handshake, no BS. He tells me, "Hey, you still got that little road that runs up the east side of your pasture, the one behind the tree line?" I said, "Yeah, it's still there. Gravel, barely maintained, but it connected to an old county road that cuts behind the Maple Ridge development. Hardly anyone used it." And then Mitch says this, Well, funny thing, I was doing a job up near Maple Ridge and heard some folks complaining at the gas station. Something about needing a new access route if that ranch guy keeps pushing back. Thought maybe you'd want to know. At first, it didn't click, but something about his tone made me pull out the parcel maps that night, just to look. I've got this old printed overlay I keep folded up in the barn office, one of those topographic-style maps that shows boundaries, easements, land use rights. Hadn't touched it in months, and that's when I saw it. That road, that little sliver of gravel weaving through the edge of my pasture, the one I'd always assumed was part of some old utility right-of-way. It wasn't public. It was mine, entirely. No easement, no servitude, not even a temporary right-of-way. Somewhere along the line, whoever plotted the Maple Ridge subdivision either assumed they had access or just plain ignored the paperwork. But as of every record I could find, going back 40 years, that road belonged to my land. And here's the kicker. It was the only drivable access to the rear half of their neighborhood. Not the main entrance, but the emergency route. The one fire trucks used, the one utility crews needed during storm season, and the one Karen herself used to loop around traffic when she wanted to skip the front gate. I stared at that map for a long while, heart pounding like I'd just run a sprint. My mind was racing, not just at what it meant, but at how they'd been using it all this time without permission. I had a dozen questions. Had they just assumed it was theirs? Had Karen known the truth and banked on me never noticing? Was this whole campaign some twisted attempt to push me out before I caught on? And right when my brain started spinning out, Laura walks in, holding a manila envelope. "This came to the P.O. box," she said. "Addressed to you, but no return name." Inside were about 20 printed pages, black and white, no cover letter. I skimmed the first few and my stomach dropped. They were internal HOA emails. Real ones. Headers, signatures, meeting notes, all of it. Half the pages were blacked out in places like someone had tried to redact stuff and done a lazy job of it. They weren't just complaints about me, they were strategies. Memos about strategic enforcement, exerting pressure through code channels, even phrases like structured attrition and destabilization via ordinance. They were talking about me like I was a problem to be solved, like I was in the way, and buried near the back, in one of the unredacted parts, was a sentence I'll never forget. If pressure continues, we anticipate a possible undervalue sale within 12-18 months. Goal, secure lakefront and rezone. That's when it hit me. This wasn't some busybody with a clipboard getting bored. This was a plan, a long-term strategy to force me off my land so they could get their hands on it. Piece by piece, complaint by complaint, burn me out, wear me down, make it easier to swoop in once I cracked. Laura sat down next to me and just whispered, "They were trying to take everything." I don't know where the envelope came from. I still don't. Maybe someone on the inside had a conscience. Maybe Karen pissed off the wrong neighbor. Doesn't matter. What matters is that someone gave me exactly what I needed. Proof. And I hadn't even told you the wildest part yet. A few days after that, I was scrolling through a local tax lien auction website. Just habit, really. I check it once in a while, look for deals, sometimes buy old sheds or salvage rights, and that's when I saw it. Her house. Karen's listed. Starting bid lower than a used truck. Apparently, she'd racked up fines and missed enough payments that the county seized it for back taxes. No red flags, no fireworks. It just slipped in quietly like any other listing. I sat there staring at the screen, thinking about every gate she unlatched, every lie she told, every smug smile as she circled our property like a vulture waiting for us to bleed out. And then I thought about that road, that little strip of gravel that ran just wide enough for one car starting at her backyard and cutting through my land. Technically mine, always had been. And suddenly the idea hit me so hard it felt like divine intervention. I didn't have to fight her anymore, I could own her. I turned to Laura and said, "I think I'm about to buy a house." She didn't even blink. Just said, "Get a good deal." Buying Karen's house wasn't about revenge. Not at first. I mean, sure, the poetic justice was loud. No part of me was going to pretend otherwise, but the truth was, I saw a lever. Something solid I could finally put my hands on. I'd been swinging in the dark for months, just trying to stay upright. And now, suddenly, I had weight. Leverage. Proof. And soon, if all went right, possession. But I couldn't just go charging in. I'd spent too long getting steamrolled by petty rules and paper trails. If I was going to win this, really win it, I had to be smart, controlled, measured. Like laying out a minefield, you don't just toss the pieces around and hope something goes boom. You place them where you know they'll count. First step, The house. I looped in a buddy of mine from downstate who buys tax properties for a living, Jason. He runs everything through a little shell LLC, totally above board. Just makes it harder for folks to trace ownership right away. We'd done some business before. I trusted him, and more importantly, I knew he didn't talk. I sent him the listing. He checked the parcel ID, confirmed the lien situation, and said, "If this is personal, it's a hell of a play." I said, "It's not personal. It's structural." We bid low. Not so low it raised eyebrows, but well under market. Just enough to beat the quiet vultures circling the auction. A few days later, it was ours. Technically his company's. But only for now. While that was cooking, I went back to the parcel map. That narrow gravel road, my gravel road, had never been part of the HOA's filings. No easement, no lease, no recorded servitude with the county, not even a request on file, which meant the HOA and all its residents had been driving through my land for years, assuming nobody would notice or care. It wasn't illegal, just unfinished, and I planned to finish it. I pulled every recorded HOA document I could find. Bylaws, meeting notes, plat filings, the whole boring stack. Took me hours, days even, but I went line by line, highlighting contradictions. And buried deep in a scanned PDF from 12 years ago was something they probably didn't think mattered. A proposal from a previous HOA president to seek easement clarification from neighboring parcels. The note said, "We'll revisit with legal counsel. No immediate action needed unless disputed." They never revisited it. They never filed a thing. Just crossed their fingers and kept driving. So I called Andrew Paxton, a lawyer I'd talked to once during all the earlier nonsense. Smart guy, bit of a bulldog, and the kind of attorney who doesn't mind making enemies if the job's worth it. I laid it all out. The road, the documents, the emails, the house. He leaned back in his chair and said, "Let me guess, you're not looking to sue." I shook my head. "I'm looking to end this. Clean, legal. Loud enough to be heard, but quiet enough to still enjoy my morning coffee." He nodded, slow. "All right then, let's build something they can't ignore." While Andrew started the legal prep, ownership transfers, boundary assertions, access revocations, I started the other half of the plan. The more human part, I needed to know what the rest of the neighborhood knew. Not Karen, not the board, but the actual people who lived in Maple Ridge, the ones who'd stayed quiet while their HOA went nuclear on a guy just trying to raise goats and build a dock. That's where Jenna Bricks came in. She was the one who'd sent the envelope. I'd confirmed it when she showed up at our gate one afternoon, hands shaking, looking like someone who'd finally had enough. "I didn't know they were trying to take your land," she said. "Not like that. I just thought it was the usual HOA crap." We talked. Long talk. Turns out she'd been to the meetings, seen how they twisted things, how Karen weaponized bylaws like some suburban warlord. Jenna wasn't alone either. A few other neighbors were quietly fed up but afraid to speak out. So I gave her a job, eyes and ears. Nothing risky, nothing shady. Just listen, take notes. Keep me looped in on what the board was planning. She agreed, with one condition. If this ended with Karen getting knocked off her high horse, she wanted a front row seat. Fair enough. Meanwhile, I started making the physical changes. Not dramatic, not aggressive, just firm. Replacing old fencing along the road, posting new signage. Private road, no through access. Nothing illegal, nothing hostile. Just a clear message. Times were changing. And then, one afternoon, while I was laying gravel to patch the entry by the tree line, a black BMW rolled past. Karen. She slowed, saw the new sign, and stopped. Right there, middle of the road, window down. She didn't say anything, just stared at me like she was trying to see past my skin and into my bones. And I smiled. Not smug, not gloating, just tired and ready. Because by then, everything was in motion. The house was bought, the land was marked, the documents were prepped, and Karen Delaney had no idea she was standing on a road that no longer belonged to her. She'd spent months trying to trap me in a corner, but I wasn't cornered. I was loading the spring. The day I put up the gate, I expected fireworks. Not literal ones, that came later, but metaphorical sparks? Yeah, I was almost surprised it didn't happen the second the posts went in. I'd spent the better part of a week prepping the entry point where the gravel road from Maple Ridge crossed into my land. Welded up a big steel swing gate, heavy enough to stop a truck if it had to, double posted in concrete. Didn't want it to look aggressive, not some Mad Max barricade, just solid. Clean, professional. There was even a keypad on the side for authorized access, which at the time meant exactly one person, me. The sign on the gate read, "Private property. Access by permission only. Road use not permitted." Nothing dramatic. No skulls, no red paint, just facts. That same afternoon, the first car showed up. Minivan, Dot's local plates. Woman at the wheel looked confused, then annoyed. She didn't get out, didn't say anything, just pulled a tight three-point turn and headed back toward the main entrance. That was the whole plan. Quiet disruption, inconvenience, force them to recognize a boundary they'd ignored for years. I didn't hear anything for 2 days. Then came the letter, printed on Maple Ridge HOA letterhead, the real kind this time, signed by Tom Langford, the HOA president, full of big serious words like easement encumbrance and historic right-of-way. Claimed I was violating community access norms and potentially obstructing emergency services. They cited 2 county codes that didn't apply to private roads and demanded immediate removal of unlawful impediments. I handed the letter to Andrew, my attorney, and he barely glanced at it before saying, "They're bluffing. They've got no paper trail, no standing. They're trying to scare you." I said, "That's been their playbook since day one." So we drafted a formal response. Short, tight, direct. Attached the parcel maps, property records, and copies of the last 10 years of public land use filings. Sent it back with a note. We recommend the HOA cease unauthorized road usage immediately. Failure to do so will result in trespass enforcement and civil liability. That's when things got loud. Karen showed up again. This time, she didn't stay in the car. She marched right up to the gate, phone in hand, recording like she was filming a documentary. "You can't do this," she shouted through the bars. "This is public infrastructure." I stayed calm. I always do in moments like that. Just leaned against the fence and said, "If that were true, you'd have paperwork to prove it. Do you?" She didn't answer, just turned the camera on me and said, "You'll regret this." And I'll admit, for a moment, I wondered if maybe she was right. Not because I was wrong. I knew I wasn't, but because people like her. They don't just give up. They escalate. And sure enough, a week later, someone took bolt cutters to the chain. I got a call from Jenna. She said HOA was telling people the gate was illegal and that the board had authorized temporary removal. One of the board members, a guy I'd never met, bragged at a neighborhood meeting that he'd solved the access problem. I reported the damage to the sheriff's office. This time, they took it seriously. Sheriff Din even called me himself, said it was criminal mischief, no question, and they'd keep an eye on things. I told him I appreciated it, but I wasn't planning to sit on my hands this time, so I reinforced the gate. New lock. Higher fence. Mounted a trail cam facing both directions, and while I was at it, I updated the title records with the county clerk to include a formal declaration of restricted access. It wasn't required. The land was already mine, but I wanted every agency, every inspector, every HOA lawyer who came sniffing around to see one thing when they pulled the parcel up. Access denied. The pushback came fast. Emails. Phone calls. A guy from the fire department called, said someone from the HOA had reported me for blocking emergency routes. I walked him through everything, gave him the coordinates, the maps, the documents. He thanked me, said I was in the clear. "They're just mad they don't have a shortcut anymore," he said, chuckling. But Karen wasn't laughing. Couple nights later, I came out to check the gate before bed and saw something glinting in the moonlight, a piece of wire, thin, coiled, stretched across the road just above tire height. Would have caught the undercarriage of any truck driving through, maybe even ruptured a fuel line. That wasn't a prank. That was sabotage. I pulled the wire, bagged it, and filed another report. Then I called Andrew and said, "We're past the point of games." He agreed. We expedited the deed transfer on Karen's house, got the paperwork finalized, switched title to a new LLC I controlled. Quiet.clean, no red flags. And then I did what I'd been waiting to do since the moment I saw her name on that auction listing. I served her a formal notice of ownership. She didn't even know she'd lost the house. That's how fast it all happened. Somewhere between the unpaid taxes and the ego, she never saw it coming. She thought she could bend reality through sheer willpower. The day she got the notice, she showed up at the gate in full meltdown mode. Hair wild, phone shaking in her hand, screaming something about forged documents and harassment. said she'd sue me for fraudulent acquisition, called me a snake, called me a thief, but none of that mattered anymore, because I didn't need her permission. I owned the house, I owned the road, and for the first time since this whole nightmare started, I felt something settle in my chest. Not joy, not revenge. Just control. The script had flipped, and she had no idea how bad it was about to get. It all came apart faster than I expected, not because I rushed anything, but because once the first thread unraveled, the whole damn sweater fell apart in their hands, like it had been waiting to come undone. The day after Karen got the ownership notice, the HOA board held one of their little emergency meetings. Normally those are closed to non-members, but Jenna texted me and said, "You might want to swing by this one." I didn't show up in person, didn't need to. I'd sent everything ahead of me. That morning, we hand-delivered a thick, spiral-bound packet to every single house in Maple Ridge. Laura and Maddie helped. Maddie actually enjoyed it, said it felt like we were delivering grown-up truth bombs. Each packet included copies of the property records, the road usage maps, the letter from the county about easement status, screenshots of the internal emails that Jenna had leaked, and a nice little summary titled, "How Your HOA Tried to Steal My Land and Got Burned." The front page was just a satellite image of the neighborhood, with a big red arrow pointing to the gravel road that now had a steel gate across it. Underneath, I wrote, "This road is not yours. It never was." By the time the meeting started, most of the neighborhood had read it, some probably twice. From what Jenna told me later, it was chaos. The board tried to act like it was all a misunderstanding, that they'd been operating on good faith assumptions. But people weren't buying it anymore. Folks who had never even spoken to me before were now standing up, demanding to know why thousands of their HOA dollars had been spent on enforcement actions against a property that wasn't even under their jurisdiction. And then someone asked the question that blew it all wide open. Did you know about the road? Tom Langford, the president, the guy who always looked like he'd rather be golfing, tried to dodge it, said he wasn't personally involved in those decisions. But Karen, who hadn't even planned on speaking, snapped. She stood up, red-faced, eyes wild, and just went off. Said yes, she knew, said it was strategic, said it was necessary because if they didn't pressure me, I'd devalue the neighborhood. She used that phrase more than once. Devalue the neighborhood. That's when things turned. Because suddenly, it wasn't about me and her. It was about them, the people in that room, their dues, their taxes, their emergency access road now behind a locked gate, their board lying to their faces. The yelling started slow and scattered, but it picked up fast. People were furious. Not performative, not HOA angry, real angry. Yeah, if that's not tonight. I heard someone threaten to file a lawsuit right there in the meeting. Others demanded a full audit of HOA finances. Somebody pulled up Karen's old property listing and realized she'd underreported the square footage for years, which might have saved her thousands in taxes. By the end of the night, Karen stormed out of the meeting and didn't come back. A week later, she was formally removed from the board. Tom resigned soon after that, said it was health-related, but let's be honest, the guy just didn't want to get sued. HOA meetings got a lot more crowded after that, and from what I heard, they even brought in an outside firm to go through every policy and document with a fine-tooth comb. But the real cherry on top came from the county. See, after all the gate drama and property damage, I filed a complaint with the State Attorney General's office. Nothing flashy, just laid out the facts. Repeated harassment, false claims to public access, targeted misuse of local agencies. I didn't expect much. Honestly, I filed it just to have it on record, but apparently I wasn't the only one. Turns out, Karen had been involved in 2 other conflicts in the past. One with a neighbor who tried to build a fence, another involving a family who painted their garage door the wrong shade of tan. And both times she'd used fake documentation to prove violations. Nothing ever came of it. Those families eventually moved. But now, with my packet in hand and the media sniffing around, the AG's office took notice. They opened an investigation. Nothing criminal at first, just oversight. But it was enough. The local paper picked it up. Then the regional news. Before I knew it, I was sitting in a folding chair behind the barn, watching a news crew set up lights and a camera in front of the dock I'd built with my own 2 hands. They asked me what happened. I told them the truth. I bought a little land to get away from people like that. Turns out, people like that don't respect fences, until you make them feel it. And when the story aired, I got emails. From other ranchers, homeowners, even a retired judge in Tennessee who said, You did exactly what I wish I'd done 10 years ago. It wasn't about the house anymore, or even the road. It was about the message. You don't get to bully people off their land just because you want the view. And if you try, sometimes they buy your house out from under you and chain the damn gate. It's quieter now, not just around the property, though yeah, that too. No more HOA letters in the mailbox, no more SUVs idling near the tree line, no more strange knocks on the gate from inspectors who forgot their ID, but I mean quiet in my head. That buzz of tension I'd carried around like a second spine. It's gone. Finally, these days, mornings start the way they should. Coffee on the porch, sunrise rolling in over the lake like a slow breath. I'll sit out there with Laura while the goats do whatever goats do, usually chew something they shouldn't, and we'll just be Maddie's back to riding her pony like it's her full-time job. She doesn't ask about moving anymore. Doesn't ask about Karen either. That part of the story's over. The house we bought, Karen's old place, I still own it. I've had folks ask why I don't just flip it, cash out, and move on, but I don't want to. Not yet. There's something fitting about it staying right where it is. Sometimes I rent it short-term to travelers, sometimes it sits empty, but every now and then I'll walk through it just to remind myself how close we came to losing everything, and how damn far we've come since. Cauchioni? Jenna still stops by. Brings fresh eggs, garden extras, sometimes a bottle of wine she swears isn't just an excuse to gossip. The HOA's still alive, technically, but it's been gutted. New leadership, new rules, and surprise, surprise, a whole lot less drama now that certain people aren't around. I've even had a few neighbors stop by over the last few months just to shake my hand. No small talk, no fake smiles, just a quiet, respectful nod like you stood your ground, and we saw it. And I guess that's the part I keep circling back to. I didn't win because I yelled louder or lawyered harder. I won because I didn't back down when it got uncomfortable, because I didn't let someone else tell me what my land was worth. Not in dollars, but in peace, in roots, in the right to build something honest and call it mine. Truth is, I'm not angry at Karen anymore. Not really. That kind of anger burns too hot, too fast. What I feel now is something closer to gratitude, not for what she did, but for what she forced me to learn. About patience, about boundaries, about how to fight without losing who you are. Would I do it all again? I don't know. I hope I never have to, but if I do, if anyone tries to come after this place again, they'll find the gates still locked, the paperwork still tight, and I'm still here. And this time, I won't even have to raise my voice, because now they already know.